Some towns hide their secrets well. Others wear them like the salt-scoured skin of the deep. Welcome to Umbral Deep, Oregon, where the fog isn't just weather. It's a living thing, and a murder case isn't just about the dead. My name is Rhys Kendrick, and I came here chasing a ghost from my past, only to find myself tangled in a present far more terrifying. This place has rules, strange rules, whispered on the wind. Rules you break at your own peril. Before we descend into the brine and blood, tell me, what's the most inexplicable thing you've ever experienced? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're ready to face the shadows and the tide with me, be sure to subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because in Umbral Deep, the dead don't just stay buried, they sing. Let's begin. The fog in Umbral Deep, Oregon, wasn't just mist. It was a shroud, thick enough to swallow sound, heavy with the briny ghosts of 1,000 forgotten storms. It clung to the weathered clapboard of the cliffside house, seeping through unseen cracks, carrying with it the cloying scent of decaying seaweed and something else, something older, like brine and blood mingled. But even this oppressive blanket couldn't entirely muffle the whisper I'd heard, or thought I'd heard, emanating from behind the crudely draped sheet covering the antique full-length mirror in the victim's bedroom. You're too late, Rhys. It had sighed, a voice achingly familiar, a voice I'd spent 5 long years trying to forget. Sarah's voice. My name is Rhys Kendrick, homicide detective. Or at least, that's what my badge says. Lately, I felt more like a professional haunter of my own past. The unsolved little dove kidnapping case, a constant cold companion. Zara, my partner back then, had vanished without a trace investigating that one, swallowed by a silence as profound as this Umbral Deep fog. And now, here I was, in another forgotten coastal town with a body laid out in ritualistic fashion, and a mirror that whispered ghosts. Rule number 1 in Umbral Deep. Detective Kendrick. Sheriff Lyra Hawthorne's voice cut through my morbid reverie, calm and steady as the coastal bedrock. She stood in the doorway, a woman whose native heritage was etched in the proud lines of her face and the assessing depth of her dark eyes. She wasn't old, perhaps early 40s, but she carried the weariness of generations who had stared into the unforgiving face of the Pacific. What the mirrors here reflect isn't always truth, especially when they've tasted salt water. Zoe, you don't photograph that one. Understood. It wasn't a question. I nodded, my throat tight. The victim, a local historian named Althea Crow, lay on the floor, surrounded by meticulously arranged seashells and strange spiraling symbols drawn in what looked like salt water mixed with something darker. The air was thick with the cloying sweetness of dried kelp and an undercurrent of rank, low-tide decay. The stillness of the room was a held breath. Sheriff Hawthorne continued, her voice devoid of dramatics. She was reciting standard operating procedure. Rule number 2. If you find any letters, missives, notes from Ms. Crow, particularly those that seem unusually addressed, you do not read them. They weren't meant for living eyes after a certain point. Consider them echoes. Bring them to me, unread. Echoes. The word resonated with the whisper I'd thought I'd heard. And rule number 3. She looked out the salt-streaked window towards the churning gray expanse of the ocean, where a few solitary gulls wheeled and cried, their calls like mournful accusations. The birds here, they see things. If you find a gathering of them, cormorants mostly, sometimes ravens from further inland, perched outside your window, staring in, you don't look back at them. You draw the blinds, or as the old fishermen say, they carry her eyes. Whose eyes she didn't specify. I didn't dare ask. I, a detective who prided himself on logic and tangible evidence, was being handed a set of supernatural house rules. Part of me wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as coastal gothic nonsense. But the grim certainty in Hawthorne's eyes, the palpable wrongness of this room, and that goddamn whisper, it stifled any Anspruchsfall. Later, as I walked past the sheet-draped mirror, a sudden, inexplicable chill swept through the room, distinct from the damp coastal air, the faint scent of Sarah's preferred lavender hand soap, a scent I hadn't encountered in 5 years, pricked at my nostrils for a fleeting, agonizing moment. And beneath it, that low, rhythmic sound, almost too faint to register. The gentle, sighing crash of distant waves, though the nearest accessible beach was a treacherous cliff walk away. The mirror wasn't just reflecting the room. It felt like it was breathing with the ocean itself. My hand twitched, wanting to tear away the sheet to see what secrets it held. But Hawthorne's warning in a deeper, more primal instinct held me back. Umbral Deep, I was beginning to realize, had teeth, and they were already tasting the salt of old wounds. The investigation into Althea Crow's death began like any other. On the surface, I interviewed the few locals who weren't too tight-lipped or too spooked to talk. Umbral Deep was a clannish place, its residents weathered by the sea and steeped in generations of folklore, their conversations laced with oblique references to the old ones of the deep and the songs the tide brings in. The fog, a near-constant companion, seemed to muffle not just sound but truth. The crime scene itself was a frustrating enigma. No forced entry, no obvious motive. Just Althea, the strange symbols, and that oppressive, watchful silence. The official crime scene photos, taken by Sheriff Hawthorne's sole deputy before my arrival, were thorough. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of a deliberate omission. The draped mirror was always photographed obliquely, its surface never directly captured, only its shrouded form. It was a glaring blind spot, a negation of standard procedure that screamed of something being actively and fearfully avoided. On the edge of one photo, I thought I saw it. A faint, distorted blur in the shadowed corner of the mirror's frame. Something that didn't belong, too indistinct to identify, like a figure submerged in murky water. Serafina Finn Holloway, a young woman with eyes the color of sea glass and a blunt, no-nonsense demeanor, proved to be a more forthcoming, if unconventional source. She was a freelance marine cartographer and diver, the one who'd found some of Althea's research papers washed up on a secluded cove. A discovery that had first alerted Hawthorne to something amiss. Althea was obsessed, Finn told me, perched on a salt-bleached piling at the town's dilapidated pier, the tang of salt and diesel heavy in the air. With the old chance, the deep language, said she could hear the ocean thinking. Started collecting strange things that washed ashore. Carved bones, bits of oddly shaped driftwood, water-warped letters in bottles that no one could decipher. She shivered, despite the thick fisherman's sweater she wore. Last few weeks, she got real scared, said the whispers were getting louder, said something was calling her name from the water. In Althea Crow's damp, cluttered study, amid stacks of books on maritime lore and arcane symbology, I found them. A small cedar chest filled with letters. They were old, written on brittle, water-stained parchment. The ink faded and blurred. Some were sealed with wax impressed with unfamiliar spiraling sigils. They reeked of the ocean, a profound, ancient brininess that seemed to permeate the very paper. Rule number 2. They weren't meant for living eyes. The urge to open them, to decipher their secrets, was a physical ache. That night, a dream came. I was diving, not in any ocean I knew, but in an abyss of absolute blackness. Far below, a faint, pulsating luminescence. As I descended, the light resolved itself. It was Sarah, my lost partner, her form shimmering, translucent. She was treading water in that impossible void, beckoning to me, her mouth moving, forming words I couldn't hear, only see as silent, rising bubbles. And behind her, from the deeper darkness, a vast, apertureless eye, like that of some colossal, unseen leviathan, slowly opened, fixing its gaze on me. In the center of that eye, for a horrifying instant, I saw the reflection of Althea Crow's salt-stained mirror. I woke up, gasping, the taste of salt water in my mouth. The whispers from beyond my motel room door were louder tonight, a chorus of sibilant, indecipherable urgings. My next port of call was Mr. Corbin Vance, curator of Umbral Deep's surprisingly comprehensive, if unsettlingly morbid, Marine Studies Institute. It was less a museum and more a mausoleum of the deep, its glass cases filled with preserved specimens of abyssal creatures, anglerfish with their needle-like teeth, translucent jellyfish, and colossal squid eyes staring blankly from jaws of Chinese formaldehyde. Vance himself was a tall, ascetic man with an almost fervent gleam in his pale eyes, his enthusiasm for the untold mysteries of the Haddle Zone bordering on obsessive. He was surprisingly forthcoming about Althea Crow, a brilliant, if somewhat unorthodox, researcher, Vance said, his thin fingers caressing a bleached whale vertebra. She believed, as do I, that the ocean depths harbored not just undiscovered species, but undiscovered intelligences, ancient consciousnesses, perhaps, communicating in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. He showed me Althea's notes, filled with complex charts, mapping oceanic currents against local legends of singing tides and phantom shores. The following morning, rule number 3 made its presence known with chilling punctuality. I awoke to a profound silence, the usual screech of gulls and crashing of waves, strangely absent. Drawing back the cheap motel curtains, I found them, a dozen or more cormorants, sleek black sentinels with eyes like chips of obsidian, perched motionlessly on the railing of my small balcony, on the windowsill, even on the rusted air conditioning unit. Every single one was staring directly into my room. Into me. Don't look. They carry her eyes. Sheriff Hawthorne's gravelly voice. My breath hitched. I wanted to snatch the curtains closed, but a morbid fascination combined with a detective's ingrained need to observe held me captive for a paralyzing moment. Their eyes weren't just black. They seemed to hold a depth, a shimmering, oily luminescence that wasn't natural. As I finally forced myself to turn away, drawing the curtains with a sharp tug, I heard a collective dry rustle of wings, a sound like brittle parchment. A wave of intense vertigo washed over me, accompanied by a fleeting, horrifyingly vivid image. Althea Crow's face, her eyes wide and staring, not with terror, but with a kind of awful, ecstatic understanding, as if she were seeing something vast and immense, incomprehensible just beyond my perception. The sensation passed, leaving me trembling and nauseous. Later that day, Finn Holloway sought me out. She looked shaken. "Detective Kendrick," she began, her voice hushed. "I found another one." She held out a small cork bottle, encrusted with barnacles and dried seaweed. Inside, nestled amongst damp sand, was a tightly rolled scroll. It washed up near Drake's Cove where Sarah's boat was last seen years ago. My heart leaped into my throat. Sarah. The bottle looked identical to the ones Althea had collected. My hands trembled as I took it. The urge to uncork it, to read what lay within, was a screaming physical need. Rule number 2. They're addressed to you. That's what Hawthorne had implied, hadn't she? Or had I imagined it? That night, I didn't try to fight it. I sat at the rickety motel desk, The corked bottle before me, the whispers from the ocean seeming to seep through the very walls. With a decisive, almost defiant twist, I pulled the cork free. A gust of cold, briny air puffed out, carrying that same rank, ancient scent as Althea's letters. The scroll inside was damp, the ink blurred in places, but the script was chillingly clear, written in a spidery, elegant hand, Althea Crow's hand. It began, "To the next unfortunate soul drawn by the Umbral Deep scourge, who feels the tide pulling at their sanity." My eyes scanned further, and a single phrase leaped out, making the hair on my arms stand on end. "For the Sybil of the salt waters sakes a new voice, and she has tasted your sorrow, Rhys Kendrick." She knows the name Sarah. The whispers in the room crescendoed, no longer indecipherable, but forming a single sibilant word, over and over. "Listen, listen." The room plunged into an icy, preternatural cold. The letter, Althea's, or perhaps the Sybil's script channeled through her, was less a confession and more a fragmented, terrifying prophecy. It spoke of the Abyssal Cantor, the murmuring Leviathan, an ancient consciousness that dwelled in the lightless trenches off Umbral Deep. It communicated not in words, but in algorithms of sorrow, in resonant frequencies of loss that it wove into the tides, the fog, the very fabric of the town. It sought out those already touched by grief, by unresolved trauma, using their pain as a conduit, a way to sing its ageless, desolate song into the world above. Sarah, Althea, myself, we were all, it seemed, potential choristers in its abyssal choir. The rules, the letter implied, were not merely local superstitions, but fragile, generational defenses, a psycho-spiritual immune system developed by the inhabitants of Umbral Deep to shield themselves from the full, sanity-shattering blast of the Cantor's song. The mirror was a focal point, a scrying glass that could trap or amplify its reflections. The letters were direct transmissions, invitations. The birds, its eyes and ears, carrying fragments of its will. My investigation now had a terrifying new focus. Mr. Corbin Vance, his obsessive interest in undiscovered intelligences, his collection of abyssal oddities, his subtle probing about my past and Sarah's disappearance. It all painted a disturbing picture. Was he merely a fascinated academic, or something more sinister? Finn Holloway, her connection to the sea now tinged with a wary respect, became an invaluable, if reluctant, ally. She knew the hidden coves, the strange tidal patterns, the local legends that spoke of a woman of the waves who lured sailors to their doom with promises of forgotten knowledge. She also revealed that Althea Crow had spent countless hours in Vance's private archives at the Institute, often emerging pale and shaken, muttering about the deep notation and the resonance engine. A resonance engine, the phrase snagged in my mind. I visited Vance at the Institute again, this time under the pretense of discussing Althea's more esoteric theories. His enthusiasm was palpable. He showed me antique hydrophones, strange oscilloscope readings of deep-sea soundscapes, and detailed charts of the Umbral Trench, its deepest point marked with a symbol that was disturbingly similar to the ones found at Althea Crow's murder scene. "Imagine, Detective," Vance said, his pale eyes gleaming, a consciousness so vast, so ancient, that its thoughts are tsunamis, its size the shifting of tectonic plates. Althea was close, so close, to deciphering its primary algorithms, to establishing a dialogue, or a possession. I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Vance's smile didn't falter. "Is there a difference when dealing with an intelligence of that magnitude? To be a conduit for such profundity, a worthy sacrifice, wouldn't you agree?" That night, armed with a warrant from a skeptical but increasingly uneasy Sheriff Hawthorne, I returned to Vance's private lab at the Institute. It was less a laboratory and more a shrine, In the center of the room, surrounded by humming, custom-built electronic equipment, oscillators, signal generators, hydroacoustic amplifiers, was a large, water-filled tank. Submerged within it, angled towards a complex array of microphones and sensors, was a mirror. Not just any mirror, but one identical in size and ornate, salt-encrusted frame to the one at Althea Crow's, and tethered before it, with a series of delicate-looking electrodes attached to her temples, was Finn Holloway, unconscious, her face pale, her body limp. Vance stood before a control panel, adjusting dials, his face illuminated by the eerie blue glow of monitor screens, displaying complex wave patterns, the abyssal algorithms. "She has the gift, Detective," Vance said, turning as I entered, his voice calm, almost gentle, like Althea, like yours, Sarah, a natural resonator. The Cantor merely needs encouragement to find its voice through her, to complete the cipher Althea couldn't. He gestured to a fresh set of spiraling symbols, drawn in salt water, and what looked chillingly like blood on the floor around the tank. A new verse for the dirge. He wasn't just studying the Cantor, he was trying to summon it, to control it. And Finn was his next unwilling instrument. The whispers in the room swelled, no longer just in my mind, but seemingly emanating from the tank, from the mirror, from the very air around us. A cacophony of sorrowful, seductive, and ting ansi ye ixie, beckoning me to listen, to understand, to join their abyssal song. The game had just become terrifyingly personal. The scene in Corbin Vance's hidden laboratory was a chilling tableau of scientific hubris and ancient horror. Finn Holloway, pale and still as death in the eerily lit tank, was clearly the focal point of whatever profane symphony Vance was attempting to conduct. The air crackled with an unseen energy, the rhythmic hum of Vance's custom-built machinery, a grotesque counterpoint to the sibilant, multi-layered whispers coiling around me, promising forgotten knowledge, and the cold embrace of the abyss. "Sarah," the whisper sighed. His spectral chorus, she understood. She listened. "Vance, what have you done to her?" I roared, my hand instinctively going to my sidearm, though I had a sinking feeling bullets would be about as effective as harsh words against whatever he was invoking. He turned, his face illuminated by the pulsating blue light of his monitors, a look of rapturous, almost religious fervor in his pale eyes. "Enlightenment, Detective Kendrick. I am on the verge of the greatest acoustic discovery in human history, the prime utterance of the Abyssal Cantor. Finn is merely the instrument, a unique bioacoustic resonance, amplified by Althea's preliminary work, and the residual psychic imprint from your dear Sarah's transmission point. She will allow the Cantor to speak clearly for the first time." "Transmission point? Sarah?" My mind reeled. "You knew about Sarah. You were involved in her disappearance?" Vance waved a dismissive hand. "Sarah was an early, cruder attempt. Her mind wasn't strong enough to channel the full spectrum. She fractured, became mere static in the broadcast. But her lingering echo, her unresolved sorrow, it tuned this location. Detective. It made this sacred nexus even more receptive." He gestured towards the mirror in the tank. "That isn't merely glass and silver, Kendrick. It's a hydroacoustic resonator, an interdimensional lens, attuned to the Cantor's deepest frequencies." Althea understood. She was trying to close it, to silence it, after she realized its true nature, a foolish, sentimental gesture. The whispers intensified, swirling, coalescing. The water in the tank began to churn, though there was no visible agitation. Finn's eyes snapped open. They were no longer the clear sea glass blue I remembered. They were a milky, depthless white. like the sightless orbs of some abyssal creature. A low, resonant hum emanated from her, a sound that vibrated in my teeth, in my bones. The overture begins. Vance breathed, his fingers flying across his control panel. Suddenly, the mirrored surface in the tank rippled, not like water, but like oil on water. Colors shifting, distorting, an image began to form. Not a reflection, but a window. A window into a crushing, lightless void, where vast, shadowy forms, impossibly ancient, moved with slow, deliberate grace. And from that void, a sound. No, a pressure. A psychic weight that threatened to buckle my sanity. The Obsidian messengers, the cormorants, materialized from the shadows of the lab. Dozens of them, their eyes glowing with that same milky luminescence as fins. They swooped and dived, their harsh cries a discordant harmony to the Cantor's burgeoning song. Sheriff Lyra Hawthorne burst through the lab door, her service shotgun leveled. She wasn't alone. Behind her were two local fishermen, their faces grim, their hands clutching heavy, iron-tipped gaffhooks. Not weapons, I realized, but something more akin to tools of warding from their ancestral lore. Vance, by the spirits of the old tides, stop this madness. Hawthorne boomed, her voice cutting through the psychic din with surprising authority. You cannot halt progress, Sheriff. Vance shrieked, his composure finally cracking. The Cantor will be heard. Its wisdom will reshape our stagnant world. The entity, the Abyssal Cantor, was now fully present, though its form was incomprehensible. It wasn't something seen, but felt. An overwhelming Anwesenheit of crushing despair, profound loneliness, and an intellect so vast and alien, it was terrifying. Finn's body began to convulse, her mouth opening in a silent scream as the hum emanating from her reached a deafening, bone-jarring pitch. The symbols on the floor around the tank blazed with an internal, sickly green light. The mirror showed not the void, but now, horrifyingly, my own face, but aged, drowned, eyes filled with that same milky emptiness. Hawthorne and the fisherman began a low, guttural chant in a language I didn't recognize, a rhythm that seemed to push back, however feebly, against the Cantor's oppressive song. They moved to flank the tank, their gaff hooks held like talismans. I knew then what I had to do. The mirror was the lens, the focal point. Sarah. Her image flashed in my mind, not beckoning from the void, but her face tight with determination, the way she looked when she was about to break a tough case. Use what they give you, Rhys. The letters. Althea's, Sarah's, the Sybil script. They weren't just messages. They were frequencies. Counter-frequencies, perhaps. The rules were defenses. But if Vance was using this place, this mirror, as an amplifier, then any sufficiently strong, opposing resonance might overload it, disrupt the dialogue, ignoring the swooping, shrieking cormorants, ignoring Vance's mad pronouncements. I pulled out the last unopened letter I'd found, the one in the bottle from Drake's Cove. My hands were slick with sweat, but I ripped it open. The script inside was frantic, almost illegible, but one phrase, repeated over and over, burned itself into my mind. Silentia maris profundi, silence of the deep sea. It wasn't a plea. It was a command, a sealing word. Vance, I yelled, my voice raw. You want to hear the Cantor? Let's give it something to really sing about. I began to shout the phrase, Silentium maris profundi, over and over, pouring all my grief, all my rage, all my desperate hope into the words. The effect was like throwing a rock into a perfectly still pond. The Cantor's psychic pressure wavered. Finn's convulsions lessened. The milky whiteness in her eyes flickered. The image in the mirror distorted. The drowned version of myself screaming in silent agony. Vance shrieked. No! You're creating a null frequency. You'll sever the connection. Hawthorne and the fisherman intensified their chant. their voices rising, their gaffhooks now pointed directly at the mirror in the tank. The cormorants faltered in their flight, some dropping lifelessly to the floor. The mirror began to crack, not with a physical sound, but with a spiderweb of light, as if the pressure from both sides, the Cantor's and my own desperate counterchant, was too much for it to bear. Silentium maris profundi, I bellowed one last time. And with that, the mirror in the tank exploded, not in a shower of glass, but in a blinding flash of white light and an implosive rush of frigid, briny air that smelled of the deepest, oldest parts of the ocean. The psychic pressure vanished. The whispers ceased. The humming from Finn stopped, and she slumped forward, unconscious but breathing. Corbin Vance let out a single, long, wailing cry, like a child whose most precious toy had been broken. Then he collapsed, his body twitching, his eyes rolling back in his head. The Abyssal Cantor had been silenced, or at least its broadcast had been catastrophically interrupted. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the heaving breaths of those still standing, and the distant, now almost gentle, sigh of the ebbing tide. The chaotic energy that had suffused Vance's lab vanished as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a chilling stillness and the heavy metallic scent of ozone mixed with salt. Finn Holloway was carefully lifted from the now inert tank, wrapped in blankets by Miss Hawthorne and the fisherman. She was alive, her breathing shallow, her face pale but peaceful. The milky whiteness had receded from her eyes. Though they remained closed, Corbin Vance was less fortunate. He lay where he had fallen, his body rigid, his eyes wide and staring, fixed on some unseen horror. A thin trickle of seawater, impossibly, oozed from the corner of his mouth. Whatever connection he had sought with the Abyssal Cantor, it seemed to have recoiled upon him with a terrible finality. Sheriff Hawthorne, her face grim but resolute, surveyed the scene. Her two impromptu deputies, the fishermen, looked shaken but stoic, their expressions suggesting this was not the first time they had faced the unexplainable wrath of Umbral Deep's shadowed waters. The old ones of the deep do not suffer fools gladly, Detective, Hawthorne said, her voice low, nor those who seek to command what should only be respected. She knelt beside Vance, checking for a pulse, then shook her head. He listened too closely. He tried to write his own verses into a song far too ancient and too vast for any mortal tongue. The equipment in the lab was a wreck. Dials were shattered, wires frayed, the custom-built amplifiers smoking faintly. The central tank, its mirror having imploded into nothingness, was now just a container of cold, still water. The strange symbols on the floor had faded, as if their energy had been exhausted. I found myself trembling, the adrenaline slowly ebbing, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the phantom taste of salt water. The words, Silentium maris profundi, still echoed in my mind, a desperate mantra against the encroaching silence. Had she known that phrase? Had she tried to use it? Or was it a message Althea had desperately tried to pass on? A key to locking a door that should never have been opened. As the storm outside began to abate, its fury spent, a fragile, watery dawn crept over Umbral Deep. The fog, while still present, seemed less oppressive, less sentient. The relentless psychic pressure that had been a constant companion since my arrival had lifted. What now? I asked Hawthorne, my voice hoarse. She looked out through a grimy window towards the gray, choppy expanse of the Pacific. Now, Detective, we do what Umbral Deep has always done. We clean up the wreckage, we tell the stories that can be told, and we pray the tide doesn't bring back anything worse. She paused. The Cantor is not gone, Kendrick. It is merely sleeping or listening from a greater depth. Its silence is a pause, not an ending. The official report would be a masterpiece of obfuscation. A rogue scientist, Vance, conducting illegal experiments with sonic weaponry, resulting in a tragic accident. Finn Holloway, a victim of his reckless endangerment. The strange symbols, merely the delusions of a disturbed mind. The town of Umbral Deep would close ranks, its ancient secrets once more submerged beneath a veneer of hard-bitten coastal normality. But I knew the truth. And as I watched the local coroner's van take Corbin Vance's rigid form away, I felt a profound shift within myself. The logical, evidence-driven detective I once was had been irrevocably altered. I had looked into the abyss, and the abyss, with its cold, ancient eyes, had most certainly looked back. Life, or what passed for it in Umbral Deep, slowly began to leach back into the salt-scoured cracks of the town. The investigation into Althea Crow's death officially concluded with Corbin Vance as the prime suspect, his death conveniently closing the case. Finn Holloway made a full physical recovery, though she rarely spoke of what happened in that lab, her sea-glass eyes now holding a new depth, a shadow of things seen and heard that would likely never fade. She returned to her charts and her dives, but with a newfound caution, a more profound respect for the murmuring immensity that lay beyond the shoreline. I stayed in Umbral Deep longer than I had intended, helping Sheriff Hawthorne tie up the loose ends, both official and otherwise. The townsfolk, sensing perhaps a shared passage through a familiar darkness, began to open up to me in small, guarded ways. They spoke of other listeners, like Althea, of other silences, like the one I had invoked, of generations spent placating the vast, unknowable consciousness that was their closest and most terrifying neighbor. My nightmares of Sarah didn't vanish, but they changed. The image of her beckoning from the void was replaced by a clearer, calmer vision. Sarah, standing on the prow of her research vessel, looking out at a storm-tossed sea, not with fear, but with a fierce academic curiosity. The phrase, silentium maris profundi, echoed, not as a weapon, but as a statement of profound, if perilous, understanding. I began to suspect that Sarah hadn't been a victim of the Cantor, but perhaps a researcher, like Althea, who had also come too close to its song, and had, perhaps, in her own way, tried to impose her own silence upon it, leaving behind a warning I was only now beginning to decipher. The letters, I realized, hadn't just been for me, but for anyone who followed. Anyone fated to hear the call. They were a fragmented map, a desperate user's manual for an entity beyond comprehension. The day I finally left Umbral Deep, Sheriff Hawthorne walked me to my car. The fog was light, the sun a pale disk in the sky. The drowned oracle will sing again, Kendrick, she said, her voice calm. It always does, but perhaps now, there are more who know how to listen for the pauses, for the silences between its verses. She handed me a small, smooth piece of sea glass, dark as the deepest trench. A reminder that not all that is unseen is empty. I drove away from Umbral Deep, the taste of salt seemingly a permanent fixture on my tongue. I returned to the city, to the familiar grind of homicide investigations, but everything felt flatter. The mundane horrors of human depravity seemed almost trivial compared to the ancient cosmic indifference of the Abyssal Cantor. Yet, I was changed. The hard shell of my cynicism had been cracked. I found myself listening more intently, not just to words, but to the silences between them, to the unspoken currents beneath the surface of things. I started researching ancient maritime folklore, obscure liturgical texts, the strange mathematics of wave theory and acoustic resonance. The little dove case remained unsolved on paper, but in my mind, a new, unsettling understanding was beginning to form. One evening months later, working late in my city precinct, a storm raging outside, I found a plain brown envelope on my desk. No return address. Inside was a single, water-stained piece of parchment. On it, in a spidery, familiar script that could have been Althea Crow's, or Sarah's, or even my own, was a single, spiraling symbol I recognized from Vance's lab floor, and beneath it, 2 words. It listens. A sudden gust of wind rattled my office window. I glanced up. Perched on the sill, undeterred by the urban landscape, was a single glossy black cormorant, its obsidian eyes fixed directly on me. I held its gaze for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, I drew the blinds. The dirge of Umbral Deep was a song with many verses, and I knew, with a certainty that both chilled and oddly comforted me, that I was now part of its endless, echoing chorus. The silence I carried within me was no longer one of absence, but of attentive, perilous waiting. You felt the chill of the salt-stained mirror, heard the call carried on the tide, and glimpsed the watchers with obsidian eyes. Umbral Deep has its hooks in you now, just like it has in Rhys Kendrick. The Abyssal Cantor is silent, for now. But its song is eternal, and its hunger is vast. This is only the beginning of the descent into the deep. Seriously, if you haven't watched until the very end, you've missed crucial pieces of the puzzle, the glimpses into the true horror that awaits. The twist runs deeper than the ocean. What do you think the Abyssal Cantor truly is? What role did Sarah play? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you survived this plunge into the darkness, prove it by hitting that subscribe button and joining the Night Creepypasta Rules community, because the tide is always turning in Umbral Deep, and the next wave might bring something far worse. Until then, try not to listen to the whispers.